The people in this community are just simply tired.
We have neighborhoods that are struggling and they need the attention.
Blight, urban decay, poverty. Problems easy to recognize all across South Florida, but the solution has been elusive. Many say financial investment is the answer.
It can be a game changer for communities that have great needs.
Others say these investments can do more harm than good.
Put the wrong people in charge, and I don't care what your structure is, you'll have some poor decision making.
You're talking millions and millions of dollars that come in, and the power associated with that is very, very intoxicating.
South Florida is replete with cities that tell two tales. On the one hand, there are areas with multi-million-dollar investment that boast of great wealth and luxurious living. It's the type of economic development municipalities work to attract. Then there are other areas that clearly suffer. It speaks to economic policies that did not pan out, broken promises, and forgotten neighborhoods that are challenged in more ways than one. But the fact is that some of South Florida's trendiest districts benefit from taxpayer dollars set aside to help the neediest neighborhoods. And it's all perfectly legal. It happens thanks to legislation passed decades ago, which allows for the establishment of Community Redevelopment Agencies, or CRAs.
Well, the mission of the CRA is to make all these improvements and make life better and make it a contributor. And when you make it a contributor, you, by necessity, make the life better for those people that are in there.
It was set up under legislation in 1969 for the purpose of addressing perceived and real problems of slum and blight and the lack of affordable housing.
The major funding source for CRAs is the tax increment financing, or TIF as it's commonly referred to.
The increment that is supposed to be generated because of the improvements in the quality and of the development go into a tax increment trust fund. So on the day that the CRA is established, the amount of money that the city and the county get in property taxes is frozen, and that's what they'll continue to get.
And that's one of the main advantages of having a CRA for a local community, is that you capture those tax dollars.
When a CRA district is created, the amount of tax revenue that the city and county get is frozen. These frozen dollars go into the general budget. Any increase in tax revenues above the base frozen amount is transferred to the CRA for use in special development areas. Some have been highly successful.
We've seen the miracle of South Point. Anybody that lived in South Florida in the 70s and 80s knows exactly what I'm talking about and knows what's become of South Point. That's a great model, and it closed its doors the moment it completed its mission.
CRAs operate under different rules than local governments. They can extend the life of the CRA and expand the areas included within the original boundaries. They can issue general obligation bonds, which must be repaid with tax dollars, without voter approval. Policymakers love this because without an okay from voters, projects move on a fast track. Politicians love it because they don't have to justify projects to the public through a vote. But do CRAs still work to combat slum and blight? Much depends upon how slum and blight are defined.
I would say, maybe Liberty City, areas of Hallandale.
7-1, 71st Street.
Blight may be tough to define, but you know it when you see it. It may look like this, or this. But what about this?
For someone to say that this area is slum and blight, I find it very hard to believe.
It's where everybody beautiful come.
So if someone's talking about Lincoln Road being a slum, then you got to be the biggest fool in the world.
They're supposed to be providing affordable housing and blight alleviation. They're not supposed to be providing hotel ballrooms and convention centers and fancy office buildings and 6- and 7-figure condominiums.
Florida law defines a blighted or slum area as one in which there are deteriorating structures, economic distress, or endangerment to life or property. In fact, it requires that slum, blight, and lack of affordable housing exist before an area can be included within a CRA.
The purposes of a CRA is the alleviation of blight and the provision of affordable housing.
The problem with the affordable housing element is that you're not going to solve a social problem with an economic model.
There seems to be a preference by the politicians who actually run these organizations to deal with private sector developers and subsidize projects in their districts rather than deal with that portion of society which truly needs affordable housing.
They start adding projects to an existing CRA, therefore extending the time of the CRA. And there is a danger. There's a danger. Any entity that now starts receiving tax dollars at the detriment of other areas in the county and the general fund, that cash that comes in could be very intoxicating to who's ever leading that particular CRA.
How do we ensure that we address the real issue why a CRA was created? How do we work to ensure that the high poverty, the high unemployment, the slum, the blight is removed?
Accountability has been a critical issue with CRAs in Broward County, where some of their most successful CRAs have also been near the greatest areas of economic development.
Their focus tend to be on the business quarters, downtowns and beaches and the like. And I understand why that is, because obviously the commercial growth could be a little bit more lucrative for a CRA.
You don't see slum and blight on Fort Lauderdale Beach area anymore. Pompano Beach CRA, that is not existent there anymore to the extent that it did back when it was started in the 80s. If you drive Sistrunk now, which is a main corridor through that CRA area, you'll see a change, and the funding from that came heavily from the CRA program. However, when you go just beyond Sistrunk, you'll still see the need for improving those areas. You still find high employment, high poverty surrounding that. People are not able to take care of their homes, to take care of their neighborhood to the extent that they should, which leads to slum and blight in most instances.
When you're spending taxpayer dollars, there's a level of accountability that should come with that. And there's a level of reporting that the public is entitled to. So for us, that's another reason we needed to take control.
The county's website expresses concerns about the potential impact of CRAs and tax increment financing on the county's tax base. Broward County is investigating irregularities in the operations of various CRAs, including Margate and Hallandale Beach.
Our program basically said we're only funding projects. We're not funding administrative staff. We're not funding these other activities. We believe we should be about funding the projects that are envisioned to transform the community.
Too much has gone to administration rather than into the community to create jobs and to reduce poverty and change the dynamics of those communities.
We were really about making sure that the development actually occurs and that the money follows the project or the money follows the initiative. We just felt that we needed to do that. So we know exactly, we can tell the public, this is where your money went.
In Miami-Dade County, there is not the same level of public policy debate as there is in Broward County. However, the future of CRAs are now on the table for discussion.
All of this requires a lot more discussion, a lot more thoughtful planning, a lot more strategic planning. You know, taking a step back, looking at the big picture. How are all these CRAs impacting us? Does it make sense for us to extend them?
There's talk of including the Bass Museum as part of this growing CRA. And if one is familiar with that area, there is no blight in that area. So really the question is, why would we be spending that kind of money there? And I would challenge myself, if I looked at every CRA on the books right now, probably every single one of them has maybe overreached in certain areas, added certain components that really make it questionable.
Some CRAs, such as Omni, no longer seem to have impoverished areas. They were successful, yet they continue to exist. They pay for improvements and even contribute to the operating costs of tourist destinations such as Lincoln Road and some of the area's famed museums.
I know a lot of people tell me, isn't Omni done? And I could say it is predominantly done. But if I really look at it on the western edge, it's really not completely done. Is there still blight in Omni? There is some, and it's to the western boundary.
North Bay Village manager Frank Rawlison, former director for both Southeast Overtown Park West and Omni CRAs, says CRAs weren't always used as vehicles of redevelopment, but rather as financial tools to retire debt.
We weren't in the building business. We didn't build buildings. What we did was we provided funding to retire bonds for the Performing Arts Center. And that's the primary reason that the Omni CRA was put together.
If you look at each CRA's manifesto, like Omni CRA, the number 3 issue there is quality of life. I believe, and I hope others do as well, that culture and arts are part of your quality of life. Or if it's not, let us make it part of your quality of life.
They've played politics with their CRAs. The Omni CRA is run by the elected official from that district. The Southeast Overtown Park West CRA is run by the elected official from that district.
This apparent conflict of interest opens the door to potential horse trading and even the creation of a government within a government.
So the creation of that secondary government then requires that you hire administrative staff, you hire a building to house them, you hire lawyers to support them. So you create all of these additional expenses that will have to be supported by the CRA.
If you have a CRA director and a CRA board, which for us is the City of Miami Commission, and they make good decisions, you can have museums. You can have movie studios, a whole nother or brand new economic development function to the City of Miami where none existed before. I happen to believe the government's role is to create the opportunities, not the guarantees, but the opportunities.
But again, the question is, can we get over the hurdle politically in the commission? Because you will have commissioners digging their heels because they have one in their district and they'll say, look, this is proven to be successful. Why not expand that improvement to other areas? But it may violate the definition of what it was created for to begin with.
Former Miami-Dade County Commissioner Carlos Jimenez once expressed similar concerns.
We really need to start to tighten up on the rules. Has any CRA gone out of business?
Well, this would have been the first one, Commissioner.
This would have been the first one.
This is the oldest one. That's the first one that was created in the state.
Okay. Because what happens is the impetus, once it gets going, is to not go out of business. It's to stay in business. They have their own infrastructure. They have their own internal mechanism. They have their own bureaucracy, and so they want to stay in business. But we've got to cut this off. And so I'd like to see in the future, if we create any more CRAs, that we put an exit strategy in the code, right off the bat.
But that was in 2005. Today, now Mayor Carlos Jimenez and others have rekindled the love affair with CRAs. For example, the Miami Beach CRA City Center redevelopment has just been extended through 2045 in an area of some of the most valuable real estate in the county. Impoverished communities throughout South Florida have waited patiently for some of the CRA money magic to come to their neighborhoods. They regret that they are not taken seriously by some local leaders who make decisions that betray the best interests of poor but hardworking families who see wealthy developers getting favored over them. That at least is how Bishop Adams feels. His church is right next to a game-changing project, World Center, which could be a catalyst for positive change, especially in an area where the median income is $13,000.
I think that the CRA is a necessary entity, particularly for our community and other communities. I'm not completely satisfied or happy with them as a whole, but I think that they are necessary in order to help eradicate slum and blight. I welcome the new development. I am not for gentrification to exclude the community, There were promises made, particularly to this community, that jobs were going to be made available. But when you boil down to the hard facts, 0.01% of this community ever benefited, even in the construction process of it.
It is a crumbled city because 50 years of neglect has happened there. If you're giving stimulus or some sort of economic opportunity on Brickell, you're probably not doing your job. But if you can't see what's going on, for instance, on the western edges of Miami and on the northern edges of Miami, and where World Center is going, then you probably have a very biased view.
The city can't afford to do it on its own without hitting the taxpayer. So perhaps the CRA, its value is in that jump start. But the ultimate question is going to be, once it's done that, when is it time to close it up?
It's not a slush fund to be used for politically popular projects like museums, but it should be used for providing affordable housing.
If you don't have the right strategy, then they're not going to be successful.
The ultimate goal of the CRA, when you're really successful, is when you can close the door. When you can say, you know what, we're done. We did our job, it's over. But the politics play in it, and, you know, that's the reality.